Picture this, a man who spent years preaching about liberty, equality, and virtue, only to end his life face down on a blood-stained scaffold, jaw shattered, unable to speak. Yes, this is the story of Maximilien Robespierre, whose execution was not only brutal, but spectacularly humiliating in ways that even he probably couldn't have imagined. So settle in, dim the lights, and let's drift together through the slow, uneven steps that carried him from revolutionary hero to broken wreck. The shot had destroyed Maximilien Robespierre's jaw so badly that fragments of bone slipped from his mouth whenever he tried to form words. For 14 agonizing hours, the man responsible for sending nearly 17,000 people to their deaths endured this torment. By the year 1792, Robespierre had come to believe that anyone who opposed him was automatically an enemy of the people. To question his authority was to prove oneself corrupt. To show compassion or mercy was, in his eyes, nothing less than treason. In April of 1793, he established the Committee of Public Safety, and within just half a year he had transformed it into the most ruthless and efficient execution apparatus Europe had ever seen. Each morning at 9 o'clock, the committee gathered in a chamber that overlooked the Seine, and by 10 o'clock, they had already determined the list of those who would be condemned to die that very day. The rise of the Incorruptible. Robespierre was born in Arras, a small town in northern France in 1758. His childhood was not particularly joyful. His mother died when he was young, and his father more or less disappeared, choosing a wandering life over the effort of raising children. That left young Maximilien to grow up under the shadow of loss. Still, he was clever. He studied law. He had one of those faces that always looked like it was mid-frown, which worked well in revolutionary politics. And he quickly earned a reputation for honesty. So much honesty, in fact, that people nicknamed him the Incorruptible, which sounds impressive until you remember that incorruptible people are also very, very irritating to work with. He spoke constantly about virtue, about purity, about how the revolution should cleanse France of corruption. He dressed simply, spoke solemnly, and rarely smiled. In other words, he was the perfect man to lead a movement that wanted to tear down everything fun and replace it with committee meetings. Revolutionary Paris. Now, Paris during the revolution was a place where being powerful on Monday could mean being headless by Friday. One day you're giving speeches about liberty. The next, you're in the back of a cart, staring at the guillotine. Robespierre managed to ride that wave longer than most. He joined the Committee of Public Safety, the revolutionary government that ran France during the so-called Reign of Terror. And terror it was. Tens of thousands were executed, aristocrats, priests, suspected traitors, and, eventually, anyone who didn't clap quite hard enough during speeches. At first, many people admired Robespierre's severity. He seemed incorruptible, after all. But soon, the paranoia grew. And naturally, when you're constantly pointing fingers and having people killed, someone eventually points back. The Festival of the Supreme Being. One of Robespierre's stranger choices was inventing a new religion. Because, of course, when you're running a revolutionary government and everything is collapsing around you, what you really need is more theology. He called it the Cult of the Supreme Being. It was meant to replace Catholicism, which the revolution had already outlawed. Robespierre himself gave sermons about civic virtue and moral purity, standing on flower-covered stages, wearing bright blue coats that made him look like a slightly anxious toy soldier. The whole thing was supposed to inspire the people. Instead, it made them deeply suspicious. Who invents a religion and then insists on being the high priest of it? Robespierre did. And his colleagues began whispering that maybe he had less of the incorruptible about him and more of the tyrant who thinks he's God. The Fall. By July 1794, Robespierre had more enemies than friends. His speeches grew darker, filled with vague threats about new purges. He stopped attending meetings, isolating himself, and eventually, his colleagues decided that the easiest way to deal with a man who kept threatening to execute them was simply to get rid of him first. On July 27th, the National Convention ordered his arrest. Soldiers stormed the Hôtel de Ville, where Robespierre and his allies were holed up. A firefight broke out. And here comes the detail that turns his story from tragic to grotesque. Robespierre's jaw was shattered. Accounts differ on how. Some say he tried to shoot himself and missed. Others say a soldier's bullet found him. Either way, the result was the same. Half his face destroyed, dangling and bloody, his teeth exposed, unable to speak. The execution. The next day, he was dragged to the guillotine. He was pale, barely conscious, his jaw tied up with a blood-soaked bandage. One by one, his allies were executed. Each time, the blade fell with its thud and cheer, and then it was his turn. The executioner tore off the bandage, holding his jaw together, exposing the wound. Witnesses said Robespierre screamed, a gurgling, broken cry, before the guillotine silenced him. It was July 28, 1794. The man who had overseen the deaths of so many, who had demanded virtue from everyone but himself, was gone. His reign had lasted barely a year. His memory, however, lingered as a warning. Drifting forward. And so, Robespierre's end was not noble, not graceful. It was brutal, humiliating, and unforgettable. A man who preached incorruptibility, undone by his own rigidity. A man who silenced thousands left unable to speak at all in his final moments. But that's the thing about history's elites. For all their power, their ends are often messy, absurd, and strangely human. And with that, let's drift onward to yet another royal or revolutionary fiasco. Because believe me, history has an endless supply.
Traitor! Liar!